They all have, there you go. They all have impressive bios. So I have made the executive decision to kind of really focus on the good stuff for tonight, which means I'm going to truncate their bio. So if anyone is upset or feel I'm doing injustice to any of the wonderful clinicians, that's completely my responsibility. So I will take full blame for that. So now in no particular order, we have first Dr. Michael Tymianski. He's a neurosurgeon at TWH with a clinical interest in vascular surgery and the molecular mechanisms of stroke and cerebral protection. He has a number of research affiliations and is founder and CEO of NoNO Incorporated, the clinical stage biotherapeutics company focused on the development of pharmaceuticals for the treatment of common health disorders with unmet needs, including acute ischemic stroke. Next, we have Dr. Karen Cross. She's a plastic and reconstructive surgeon and a graduate of the Surgeon Scientist Training Program here at U of T. Her focus is in advanced tissue injury and wound care, and she is currently based out of Dalhousie. Karen is co-founder and CEO at MIMOSA Diagnostics, which has developed a multispectral mobile tissue assessment device, which has obtained FDA and Health Canada clearance and is currently being commercialized in the market. And finally, I believe he will be joining us a little bit later. I think he's in the cath lab, will be Brian Courtney. Brian is an interventional cardiologist at Sunnybrook Hospital and a computer engineer from Waterloo. Brian invented the world's first catheter-based system that combines ultrasound and optical coherence tomography imaging, enabling greater precision during coronary angioplasty and stenting. Brian co-founded Canavi Medical in 2007 to help commercialize the device. And as I said, hopefully he'll be joining us in a few minutes. So first, I want to thank the panelists for agreeing to be in today's session. And so let's get started. So we've got a wide range of individuals here, all the way from, I believe, medical students, all the way to seasoned faculty. I suspect many are looking for opportunities to enter the innovation and entrepreneurship arena and take some valuable lessons home. So before we get started, though, I wanted to start with sort of a simple question and ask the panelists, maybe just like answer why, right? Like each of you had great academic careers. You're presumably doing research that you were incredibly passionate about. Your career trajectory was set. Talk to us about why you decided to take the entrepreneurship journey and maybe a decision framework for how to sort of move from academics to entrepreneurship. Karen, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it started with a personal experience that I had with the healthcare system. So I'm an expert in this space. I'm, performing research that's related to wound healing and skin injuries. But it wasn't until my own family member had a diabetic foot ulcer, and I recognized what was happening in the system that I realized, wait, what I'm studying in my lab, what I'm doing in my clinical practice, it's not going to change the environment. It's not going to change the game for these patients that are seeing it emerge. And so it led to the idea of, how could we solve the problem? How could we solve this clinical problem? Let's create technology that can solve the problem. Let's bridge the gap between urban and rural care. So for me, it was kind of like a little bit of a push. My family is entrepreneurial, so I think in the end, I was the only one that did go to university in medicine, et cetera. So, and I think as a plastic surgeon, we are running our own businesses. We know almost every day, we're not salaried. We have private practices. We run businesses. So I think there's a little bit of that in most of our practices too, is that in the end, you do run your own practice.
And was this Karen, was this sort of a decision, you made on Friday and then you took the leap on Monday? Like, what did that path look like as a surgeon in a, defined career? How did you kind of think about that?
Yeah, no, it's not a decision you can make lightly. I mean, I'm full-time at the company now, right? And I'm not practicing. So you don't come to that decision overnight. I mean, it takes time, and you want to see traction. You want to see that you have something that makes sense in the system. But it took many years, to get there. It wasn't an overnight thing. And in the end, the decision was made because the company is commercial, it's scaling, and I can't be a full-time surgeon. I couldn't be a full-time CEO and a full-time scientist. So decisions had to be made. And my decision was to run the company, but that's not for everybody. So I don't want to highlight that my path is for everybody, and you can do it lots of other ways. So it just happened to be what I was passionate about and what I wanted to do.
Fair enough. Michael, anything to add to that? Because I know Karen's doing medical devices, you're doing biotherapeutics. Does that resonate? Or is it a different path if you're looking at a different technology?
A lot of it does. Yes, it is a very, very different path. Drugs and devices are like night and day in terms of the development approaches. and also the life cycles of a particular program. But um, for me, it was just to add, I agree with everything Karen said, but for me, among the most important things that I've always been a surgeon scientist at heart, but actually a scientist, right? My kids on day take your daddy to school day didn't introduce me as my daddy, the neurosurgeon. They introduced me as my daddy, the scientist. Because every time I came home, I never spoke about surgery. I always spoke about all the cool things that we're discovering in the lab, right? So that's kind of where my mindset was. For me, one of the problems was I peaked a bit too soon. I started my lab in like 1997, and by 2000, I had two papers in science, right? And as you know, the life cycle of the scientist is we love what we do. We do research. Uh, we try to publish our research in the best peer-reviewed journals, which gives us the cred to get research grants to do more really cool research so that we can publish that in the best peer-reviewed journals, et cetera, et cetera. So by 2000, and I was a stroke researcher, still am. So by 2002, we had published in Science the magic formula of a white powder that, when given to rats, dramatically reduces the damaging effects of experimental stroke. So I had a bit of an identity crisis because that was the whole purpose of being a stroke researcher, to try and understand the cellular and molecular mechanism of ischemic brain damage in order to, and that's where being the clinician matters. You're not doing the science to be a stargazer. One of the benefits of being a clinician is that it does give you a perspective of what it's for. And for me, it was to understand these mechanisms in order to target them. And there we had it. We had like an optimal molecule in 2002. And I was kind of thinking to myself, well, so what do I do now? Do I put it in a drawer and start the process over again? Or do I now take this further? And of course, didn't feel like putting it in a drawer, but at the same time, I had no clue what it would entail to take it further. Because, I founded a company in order to be able to take it further. And here we are 22 years later, still working on that project, right? So what got me going into industry was essentially the feeling that it was my duty as a scientist. The other thing that perhaps others on this call could also speak to is no one will ever advocate for your project better than you. So if you actually want to see it happen, you cannot hand it off to a tech transfer office or to a VC firm who will put in a management team, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing for me that may not apply to many of my colleagues on this call is that I picked a field that was the equivalent of scientific leprosy. I picked a field trying to create a stroke neuroprotectant. And historically, everyone has failed in doing so. So it is almost as bad as sepsis, Ori, in terms of an investment space, right? So I had to create a company because you couldn't get a VC interested enough to just say, well, we'll put a few $1 million in it, we'll put our best team on it, and we'll get it done. And what I've found over the last 22 years is that had I not been thinking first like a scientist, this project would have failed long, long, long ago. So I'll stop there.
Fair enough. No, some great points, and I think some very diverse opinions between the two of you. So that's great. You did mention the tech transfer office, so can't help but go to everyone's favorite topic, which is sort of IP. both of you, and Karen, I'm not 100% sure, but you'll tell us. I'll go to you first. Is sort of, I believe your IP came out of academia. I'm not 100% sure. In the spirit of, what would you tell your earlier self as you kind of looked at your IP, trying to move it out of academia into MIMOSA? What were sort of some of the challenges that you kind of, you wish you knew back then what you might know now, and maybe you did everything perfectly, so kudos to you if you did, but if you didn't, what are some of the lessons that you can sort of impart for the audience here today?
I think the first thing, just take one step back, is there's a difference between your idea, or what we call innovation, and entrepreneurship. So just because you have an idea or you found something that seems unique in your lab, it doesn't mean that you have, you can become entrepreneurial, or you have a company, et cetera, right? So not everything, it's not what you think it is. It takes a lot to commercialize something. But the most important first step is that the university doesn't own your IP. So it's different. I'm going to talk about this with the device lens. In devices, we know that, if you're going to see any kind of success in commercialization, or, with a strategic coming in to help you in an IPO, et cetera, that IP has to belong to the company. So if it belongs to university, I can tell you right now, it'll close every funding door, especially if they take a large chunk of it. So again, unless you're Stanford or MIT, or there's some big name behind it. And so the first thing that happened for us is just really recognizing that we were not going to be able to be funded if we could not get that IP reassigned to the company. And even now, when we file patents, those patents go to the company, right? We have our inventors, within our tech team, but, it's reassigned into the company. And I think it's really important. And it was the first question we were asked when we started to raise capital in the beginning. It's the first question we get asked right now is, where does this IP sit? And is it associated with the university? And again, it's something that we have to navigate. I mean, the reality is we're uniquely innovative and, technically entrepreneurial in academia. But, a lot of these ideas are coming out of academic institutions, but I will challenge the university, and I've been outspoken about this and saying, okay, if you want to commercialize these opportunities, if it's a licensing deal, that is what it is. But if it is something where you're truly building a company, you have to be a little bit innovative and maybe give up a little bit as a university to make sure that company can continue to be funded. So again, I think, it's worked out well for us, and we've continued to file and protect our core asset. But for us, we got it reassigned quickly to the company.
Right. Michael, anything to add to that and sort of?
Yeah. So everything that Karen says, intellectual property is what the company is built around, right? Because you don't even build meaningful prototypes and all that with devices and all that unless you have the assurances that these things can be commercialized. So if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if there's commercialization anywhere in there, you have to own the intellectual property. That's sometimes not so easy, but generally not so hard. And the reason is that there's always a deal to be had, right? I personally feel that it is very difficult for a university tech transfer office, which has, and I'll speak to UHN, so it's not the university, but same kind of policies. A tech transfer office that maybe has a dozen employees to be able to understand the implications of a certain technology, right? The usual approach is disclose what you discover, and then they decide whether this is worth supporting or not. And if not, then there's one path. And if they do, there's another path, right? That's all good and fine if you're planning to just have, have a patent and continue with your scientific career. But if you want to build a company around it, a company absolutely has to own the intellectual property and all of its derivatives. which basically means that you need to negotiate some kind of an agreement with the organization where the assignment of the actual patent goes to you, well, to your company, and there's milestone payments, there's royalty streams, there's whatever, but there's always a deal to be had. One of the true facts is, there's an association of university tech transfer offices, and they publish statistics, right? And I think the statistic is that 90% of university tech transfer offices don't make enough in royalties to pay for their own salaries. So it's sometimes very difficult to negotiate when you don't have someone to negotiate with, either because they're short-staffed or they're not knowledgeable in the field. But it's a non-starter. You cannot have a company without intellectual property. No investor will ever put in money if there isn't clarity around how revenues and profits or losses will flow, right? So, when I started 22 years ago, I didn't have the luxury of what we have at U of T now, where there are more surgical entrepreneurs and so on. I was kind of on my own. So I was fortunate to be mentored by the great John Evans. I don't know if you guys know that name. You do, Amol, because you worked at Mars, and he was one of the founders. I actually started with him before Mars began. And John's words to me was, first thing, get your IP landscape in order, right? So I cannot overemphasize how important that is. And sometimes it can be very frustrating. I currently mentor at the Creative Destruction Labs, CDL at the Rotman. And every few weeks, I see companies that are in various stages of their IP negotiations with their organizations. And sometimes they're very easy, and sometimes they're unbelievably frustrating. But it just has to be completed, because if it's not, anything else you're going to do is a non-starter.
That makes sense. So just for the benefit of the audience and benefit of myself as well, when should you go to the tech transfer office or the commercialization department? So there's many people here who probably have IP. They're working on something early. Is it when you have a product? Is it when you think you have IP? Clearly, there's some sort of rules around publications and stuff. But I'm just sort of saying, tactically, from your perspective, Karen, Michael, like when did you go? Did you go too early? Did you go too late? What would you advise some of the individuals here on the call?
You cannot go too early.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. It's because you cannot do anything else until you've got clarity around the intellectual property. So if you have some incredible idea and you want to put it into practice, and you think that the only way to do that is to file a patent, right? And the reason why you would do that is to protect the intellectual property so that it can be commercialized by you or somebody else. That is the first step. So you simply cannot do anything else until that's sorted out.
Got it.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. And just a bit of a shout out to Ori and his team at St. Michael's Hospital, because we went right away. And they quickly helped us navigate the pathway. We had no idea what we were doing. And, they even gave us some advice on, like, we think this might be your best path forward, and or what we are prepared to support. So just hats off. And that was Sammer on Ori's team. And like, she's fantastic. And again, not to put in a plug for St. Mike's, but I will. Ori's on the call, so I'm going to give a little plug out for St. Mike's. Yeah, I think we are uniquely entrepreneurial. I mean, there's a lot of, I was just at a meeting in Vegas, which the most innovative device companies were invited to be part of this display. And there were 3 Canadian companies at that meeting, and all 3 were from St. Mike's. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that piece, because you're kind of surrounded also by other people who were doing the same thing. And I guess I'm getting off track a little bit, but go early to your tech transfer find your community of people who are doing what you're doing, even if it's not in the same space, and start asking questions like, what did you do? How did you navigate this? So I think it's not just the tech transfer office. Find other people who are going down or ahead of you or going down the same path and start talking to each other. And you can learn a lot. So again, you can't tell everything that you have until you have it protected, but you're not giving much away if you're just asking about pathways and how did you navigate that. So a lot of people still at my own hospital do call and say, Karen, like, how did you do this? And like, I'm thinking about this. And I don't want to speak for Mike, but I'm sure it's the same. Like, we're here and open and available for those calls. It's scary sometimes because we're not trained to be entrepreneurs. We're not trained to do this part. We're trained to operate and we're trained to publish.
There's another really important reason for the IP to own the IP that never gets mentioned, right? Just because you file a patent doesn't mean that the patent will be allowed. Okay. It's always a back and forth. And here I'll restrict myself to the only space that I know, which is drugs, not devices, right? But the US Patent Office, which is really what you're targeting commercially, the standard operating procedure, the working practice is to deny. Okay. The patent examiners are actually given a quota of how many patents they're permitted to allow per year, right? So when you submit your patent, it's going to be denied, right? Which basically means that patent prosecution has to be done by a highly, highly competent IP legal team. If you go to a tech transfer office and they basically want to maintain ownership of this, they also maintain prosecution. And they work with the legal firms with whom the organization has contracts and has negotiated fees and so on and so forth. But those legal firms may not actually be the best ones to prosecute your patent. So the first thing that I did when I freed the intellectual property from UHN is that I picked the top firm in Palo Alto, California, that had like a superstar IP lawyer that specialized in peptide drug intellectual property, which was this little niche that was essential to us. And that was invaluable. That was absolutely invaluable because getting those first few patents through was a real battle, and you needed somebody who really, really understood the US Patent Office and the process. So again, no one will advocate for your product better than you and your team. Keep it with you and your team.
That makes a lot of sense. And thank you for offering to the guests networking. I can't emphasize that as much. And Michael, I think you said it best, is there are way more entrepreneurs now than there were certainly when I went to medical school 20 years ago. So take advantage of that. Sure. I think most of us are willing to share our knowledge and our lessons, whether they be good or bad. IP is a whole topic on itself. So let's just assume you go early, you get things done, you sort of, you get to extricate it to the company nice and easily. It's all yours. Where do you go from there? How do you start to get sort of traction? What kind of hacks, for lack of a better word? I'll go to you, Karen, first with the medical devices, because again, Michael will talk about sort of how biotherapeutics is different, but what kind of hacks did you do at that point to sort of accelerate early stage development? Like what kind of sort of tricks? I've been in sessions where physicians, like, they have something and it may not be sort of academic IP, but they have something, they just don't know where to go. Like, now what do I do with this? What are your sort of suggestions to going from that sort of really early stage development to sort of moving things down the road and getting some traction?
Yeah, I think the first decision you have to make is, are you going to take it all the way, or do you need help, or are you going to hand it off to someone with a business background? I don't have a business background, but decided to take on the role of CEO. So I think decision number one is, what do you see your role in the organization? Maybe you're the technical person or the scientific officer, but you need to bring in business expertise. So that's decision number one. The second decision is that if you've never done this before or you don't have anyone around you who has, then you got to find a network of people pretty quickly who can talk you through business models, financial modeling, like planning your roadmap, manufacturing, all of the things that are important for commercialization. And you can find those people even at the university. So we went to Creative Instruction Lab as well. We got our funding from there. We met a very, very smart master's in business student in the beginning to help us with our modeling. Went back to the tech transfer office who had some support where we could have some of this reviewed. And that's how we got started. Now, as you go, certainly things change, but in the beginning, that's sort of step one is just try to put a network around you and find some support around the business. The other thing I would say is as a device, and we're a class 2 medical device, you have to make a decision on where you're getting cleared. And so everyone thinks that, the hardest thing you have to do with a device is get it cleared. And I would say that's not true. The hardest thing is who pays for it. So in the US, which is our primary market, so 85% of all of our sales are into the United States. We thought, okay, great, we got FDA clearance, let's go. And the most important thing for us was having a reimbursement code. And the minute that code started to pay is when things started to turn for us. So it's not enough to get your clearance, and your roadmap should not end at clearance. It needs to say, how do you commercialize this product with or without a reimbursement code? If you don't plan to get a reimbursement code, then the United States it's not your market. So you have to look elsewhere of where you might start that commercialization and have a pretty good plan on how you're going to get there. And I think the old adage of getting your CE mark and then coming back to North America used to be the way we did things in devices. But honestly, right now, if you can get through on a 510K, most people are going to the US. So it's a little bit different, and things have shifted in the last 5 years with some of the changes that have been made to the CE mark. But it's a bit of a loaded question, because if you look at the whole history of what we did and knowing what I know now, and then I can't even believe people gave me money.
And say that in case there's any VCs on here.
They were definitely paying for the vision. But the reality is we've hit all of our milestones. And again, COVID, our story is one of resilience for sure, because again, not to be too long-winded, but just as COVID hit, we got our FDA clearance. We had just started with the customers and everything went away. Not only that, supply chain went away, and we had to start the manufacturing process again because we lost every single part that we have put on this product. We had to clear it again at the FDA, so we had to do it all over again. So yeah, I've learned a lot along the way. And I think this year, I don't know, it's a journey, but you are continuing to learn, and at each stage, putting different types of people around you to help you get to the next stage.
That's great.
Just translate what Karen said into English.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know that a lot of people understand some of the FDA terms and all. Your question was actually, so what do you do after you get the intellectual property sorted out, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, what would you tell yourself? What did you learn? But
well, the answer is you have to have a plan, right? In business, it's called a business plan, right? And a business plan is not just, it will grow organically, and if you build it, it'll come. It does have some really, really key components. So that's kind of where some mentorship, if you've never created a business plan, maybe today you can go to ChatGPT and have ChatGPT give you a business plan. But realistically, you do need to figure some stuff out. So Karen mentioned a few things that can be paraphrased by something that the FDA says, and that is begin with the end in mind. All right. So what is all of this for? Because what I've seen is a lot of companies not really have clarity on the plan beyond the stage where they can convince some of the people some of the time, right? So if this is a device company, the life cycle of a device is typically, 3-4 years before you sell to Medtronic or to whoever, right? that has to be part of the plan, right? What are your milestones? What are the inflection points? And what do you plan to do? The business plan itself, though, can't be, I'm going to invent, the world's greatest garage door opener and then sell it for $1 billion to Canadian Tire. You do have to, as part of your pitch, okay, because you do need to pitch your plan to people who'll support you. You do need to have the end in mind, because whoever's going to buy you, they're going to need to be convinced of what that end is, right? So if this is a better garage door opener, you need to understand who your market is, right? And the kinds of things that Karen was touching on, that the greatest challenge for a medical device is not to create something that works, but something that will be used, right? And that means two things. The users have to be convinced that it's beneficial, and it has to be reimbursed somehow. Somebody has to have the ability to make money from it, right? So business plans are essential in order to give yourself a roadmap and the people that you pitch to clarity about how this whole thing is going to be monetized. In reality, things never go according to the business plan, right? There's always tweaks and turns and so on and so forth. You always have to raise more money than you think, et cetera, et cetera. COVID happens, et cetera. But your ability to come up with that cogent story proves to the people that want to invest in you that maybe you know what you're doing, right? An investor will look at a few things before they part with their dollar. One is what the company technology is, and their freedom to operate, which includes intellectual property. But the other is the management team and how knowledgeable they are, right? So that is the business plan.
Yeah. I think the one thing I will call out for the audience, because I think it often gets confused, which Karen, you highlighted, is FDA approval is not equal to reimbursement, right? Like FDA is about safety and efficacy, and it has nothing to do with reimbursement. I see a lot of physicians assume that they get through the FDA, they get through reimbursement.
That's just permission to open up your storefront and
exactly.
to be able to sell it, right?
Exactly.
But maybe nobody will buy
it. Yeah. And I love your concept about the business plan. I think the business plan, from when I started sort of 15, 20 years ago, has changed from this is the roadmap for success, Michael, to it's actually the team has thought about what success could look like, but very importantly, what points of failure might come up as well, and the ability to plan for that ahead of time, not when failure happens. I think some people just forget that everything is not up and to the right, right? And so the plan actually helps if you've done your job right, really to think about where are all those potholes and how am I going to get around them if and when they do show up. I think that's incredibly valuable.
I believe is inherently surgical, because when you start an operation, you constantly think of where are the high risk parts, right? And if this happens, then I can do X, Y, Z. Like being a surgeon is actually, in some ways you're constantly in risk mitigation mode, which is what you're talking about. And when you build your business plan, your part of your business plan is, if XYZ happens, like, what are we going to do about that? That you've thought through if, the bottom falls out of this barrel. And I remember an investor who's reinvested in us. Again, he said to us and the leadership team, he goes, the reason I like you and the reason I like your team is because when you see the wall, you don't go through the wall. You're not driving in the car into the wall. You're saying, okay, how can we get around this roadblock? And you're looking at, you're going to climb over it, you're going to go around it. And he said, that's why I'm reinvesting, because we know, and these are people who've built businesses over and over again, that building a business is about going around roadblocks, and that you can see them before you hit them. Sometimes you hit them, but I don't think everyone thought the tariffs were going to be as big of a deal as they were, but here we are. So I think risk mitigation is uniquely surgical. That
makes sense. Both of you are in businesses that require fuel, so that's funding. I've met lots of entrepreneurs. I know very few who've done a perfect funding path going forward and got the valuations right, got the raise right, got the runway right. Maybe you guys are different, but both of you have taken in money. What do you wish you had done differently around the funding of your companies? I think this is a safe space, but just in case it is, don't mention any names of people that you wish you'd not taken money. But are there lessons that you would sort of impart on the audience around funding of ventures? Either of you.
I
Take a
think
crack at that.
it means different in pharma versus devices, but you should look at other companies that look somewhat like you. So for us in portable medical imaging, ultrasound, has really upregulated itself. So go back and look at how much money did they raise to get whatever revenue multipliers they're at currently. And if you, again, partner at CDL and you have a master's student over at Rotman, maybe they can help you get what's called pitch book data or try to get some understanding from ChatGPT. Even now you can do that. Look at how much money they raised to get to where they're at. And the history, and just that gives you a sense of how much money is required at which stage and what they had achieved at each point. And it gives you a sense of what the journey looks like. So that's the first step. I do wish I had done that at the beginning, and we were a little naive on how fast we could get this thing into market. We weren't expecting COVID, et cetera, but here we are. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we're Canadian. And there are not a lot of investors in the device sector. So it may be implantable or, it's very specific, but in our space where we don't fall into pure digital health, we're truly a device. There are very limited VCs here, which means you're trying to go to the US. And so you've got to get in front of those US investors pretty quickly. If you can't land a VC here, you can make the introduction. So, yeah, it's been an interesting journey. We bootstrapped a portion of the company. For everyone on here, bootstrapping means maybe you've done an R&D deal with a large company who puts in what they call non-delivery, means they don't take a portion of your company. They're just giving you money to do a job. So we did a bunch of jobs, for example, that helped us cut the amount of what they call dilutive funding. And we were able to work that way. But again, not always ideal because you're hitting your milestones, but you're not, this big, massive invested company. So, but the part that I'm most proud of along the journey is that people who started with us at the beginning have reinvested. And I think it means a lot to us to see the first people who believed in our vision and mission who come back and say, yep, we're going to write a check, and they write large checks and they're writing bigger checks. Again, because we've been able to navigate and get to this point of commercialization. So I'm not sure if that's helpful to people on here, but back to the point at the beginning, look at the end and go backwards and see.
Michael, any funding lessons, pearls of wisdom to throw on the floor?
Yeah, very early. So the two most important pieces of advice that John Evans gave me. So this is like time zero of my entrepreneurial career. The first was get your IP landscape in order. There's actually three pieces. The second was stay away from VCs as long as you can. Eventually, you'll run into them. And the third was there's no such thing as a nice drug company. So let me explain I already explained the get your IP in order. Karen touched on this. The VC landscape in Canada is fairly small and highly conservative as compared to what's available in the United States. All right. So they talk big, but actually they rarely lead around. Okay. They like to follow. So, typically a VC will lead and get some other VCs and all that to put some money into a chunk. Canadian companies follow more often than they lead. Not unlike my comments about tech transfer, the range of expertise is less just because of the sheer scale of the US VC community compared to what we have in Canada. And again, you might wind up in a situation where you are having to negotiate someone who you don't really have a really good feeling will be a good advocate for your project, right? Fortunately, it was adhering to John's advice was not easy, but it was the only way forward because nobody invests in neuroprotection for acute ischemic stroke. So over 22 years, I raised approximately $200 million from private sources, right? So I've stayed away from VCs forever.
So when you say private sources, Michael, are you referring to angels, family offices?
Private individuals and family offices.
Yeah, okay.
Right? That's not a common scenario. It probably will never happen again, but it is doable. I have another acquaintance who he's at a different scale, but he started a solar company and raised $360 million privately, right? So VCs are not your only way. So one thing is that you need to inform yourself about what the alternative funding sources are. And there are actually all kinds of really good papers about that, even in the scientific literature, in Nature, and so on. The other thing is there's no such thing as a nice drug company. In Karen's case, it would be a device company, right? Doing a deal, okay? There is no free lunch. Everybody wants something for what they're putting in. So you can try to be non-dilutive. The best way to be non-dilutive, quite frankly, is getting peer-reviewed funding, right? But any deal that you do with a company that involves them putting money in, either they're expecting a service back or they're expecting first option later on, right of first refusal, that kind of thing. There is no free lunch. In fact, the cheapest money in the world is private money. Okay. And on that, the only other thing that I would add, because I've seen this not adhered to, especially with private money, where private individuals may not be knowledgeable, right? They may have they may like you because you're a doctor or a surgeon. They may know you from your clinical work. You have a fair amount of cred with them. Always be brutally honest. I spent the first 20 annual general meetings of my corporation pouring buckets of cold water over shareholder expectations, always. And in fact, my initial pitch, which I don't recommend to anyone, was kiss your money goodbye. You'll probably never see it again, but it's a good cause.
True, but it doesn't sell.
So don't lie, don't misrepresent, because it's not a house of cards. The day of reckoning comes where you need to show something for that money, or it's over.
Yeah, no free lunches for sure. It's 5:50. I'm just going to open it up to the audience. There's nothing in the chat that I can see, Joanne. I don't know if you can see something. I don't. Anyone, I'll open it up. I have a couple more, but if anyone here in the audience has something they want to ask Michael or Karen, please feel free to put your sort of virtual hand up and ask away. Give it a couple minutes. Quiet, shy audience. You've intimidated them all, Karen and Michael.
Hey, Amol, I can ask a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Thanks so much for the talks. That was great. More of an open question for Dr. Tymianski or Dr. Cross. You talked about raising money or getting different kinds of financing. If you're going to do it again, what do you prefer? Like, is your preference arranged equity financing, debt financing? What kind of vehicle do you kind of go after? What's worked best for you, especially with the type of investors you've worked with?
Well, go ahead, Karen.
No, please.
Um, debt financing works with your mom and dad, but with everybody else, you actually have to have collateral. Typically, when you're starting a company, unless you want to put up your own house and your own, your own property as collateral, you don't actually have anything. So debt financing most frequently occurs um, as a bridge between rounds or something like that, when you need to raise money very quickly for a specific purpose, but it is not kind of the vehicle for getting a startup together in most instances. Usually there's a seed round, right? And you use that money to achieve certain milestones that hopefully involve proof of concept to the point where you can do your Series A, your larger Series A round that will get you to some inflection, some value inflection of your company. You can do debt, but how are you going to service that debt early on when your company is not revenue generating?
Yeah, yeah. I was inquiring a bit kind of like convertible debt versus negotiating an ownership stake right away when you don't know what your company is worth. Like you can raise debt and in the future negotiate conversion to equity, as opposed to getting a loan from a bank like you typically would. But if I mean I just don't need
Right.
an exact answer, but if you have experience with both or one or the other, that'd be great.
So I have. It's just that I don't know of a single bank that will give you a loan to start a company unless you've got some serious collateral. So you first have to have some value in the company, and most Canadian banks are pretty conservative, and in my experience, they will only extend you a credit line if you've got money in the bank or if you're revenue generating and are able to show them audited financial statements to that effect. I don't know, Karen, whether you
Yeah,
have
the
any
same. Yeah,
experience.
the banks, like we tried at the beginning. You try everything. And it's the one time when there's no humility at all. You have to ask everybody for money and wherever you can get money. But yeah, I mean, almost all the cash that we've brought into the company has some sort of equity tied to it. Not really anything from the bank. And the bank, you'll be pretty lucky to even negotiate lower banking fees because
How
you're on the
did you
business banking side.
how did you go about coming up with a valuation when you started?
So you did
Um, yeah,
the valuation piece is really super important.
it is, and the thing is, I think a lot of us get taken advantage of at the beginning, us included. We just didn't know. We didn't know what we don't know. No, we're different now. We got smart really fast. But there's no, at the time, there was no crash course and like, oh, this is a good valuation. So, you do what you have to do to get yourself started. And the reality is that don't despair if you've already done this. You can recap a table. Like there's lots of other things you do as you go that I didn't realize. And this is why I would say the biggest message from me to all of you is put your network around you. People who will advocate, who know business. The reality is, unless you're doing investment banking deals or you've done these deals before, how could you possibly know what you're doing? So just, phone a friend, call one of us, ask for advice. And again, things can be fixed as you go. So you're not locked in from the very beginning, so don't despair. I've learned a lot in the last 2 years, especially about recapping tables and improving your equity stake in your business. So yeah,
Thank you.
that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Sam, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And sorry if you touched on this before. I just stepped out for just 1 second, but I'm just curious, in terms of both of your experience in starting companies with different different types of devices or drugs, within Canada, and touching on the fact that, VC money in Canada is probably more difficult to come by than VC money in the United States. But I'm actually more curious from how you both approached sort of a regulatory or an IP protection standpoint, being Canadian, having Canadian companies, but knowing that ultimately the solution that you develop is probably going to have its predominant market in the US. Have you focused on sort of Health Canada? Have you even considered much of Health Canada, or did you sort of go straight to the FDA route, knowing that, maybe the Canadian market will come afterwards? And then the follow-up question to that is, in terms of that testing, as physicians doing that in Canada, like, do you have to have that Health Canada relationship to do that while you're here?
So we went right to the FDA, knowing that the US was our market. Also, Canada doesn't buy, right? We don't buy our own innovation. And, there's over and over again. And I was interviewed by the Globe last week where I said the exact same thing and nothing's changed. However, that may change now, right? With tariffs, we'll see what happens. But also the size of the deals are very small compared to what might happen in the US. And the US is willing to take risk. So perhaps you're not perfectly buttoned up for us, for example, in the beginning on cybersecurity, but they said, hey, we'll do some risk sharing here because we like your innovation. So it's just different. And, the final thing I'll say is that we've had deals in Canada where you just want to get the deal done so you can kind of get some interest at the organization, and it's cost more in legal fees than it has in the sale of the product. Whereas in the US, that sale, sure, you'll take the risk there, but it's going to give you like 10x, like 20x in their next purchase. So you have to think about who's buying first and then decide your path. For us also, the FDA has a program where you can call them and say, what's the class of device? What's the pathway? What do you think is the best way for us to move forward? And then you have someone assigned to you. So they help you through the process. We found the process actually, it's not that it wasn't difficult. It's just known. Whereas sometimes Health Canada can be it can be different, right? It's just not as transparent. It's changed. So we got FDA, went to Health Canada after. So that was sort of our path. Yeah. But first question is always who's going to buy, and does the system have the money to pay for what you're providing? Yeah.
And as a rule of thumb, it's not always true. And as of now, may not be true even more. But generally, the FDA has been the yardstick in terms of the standards that a biomedical technology needs to adhere to in order to be acceptable as a scalable product, right? So it's not necessarily that the FDA is the strictest. So if you pass the FDA, you're guaranteed to pass everything else. But in drugs, commercially, the US is about 50% of world revenues, and the rest of the world, so Europe is about 25 to 30% of revenues, and the rest of the world is the other, 20 to 25%. So there's no question that the biggest markets to date have been in the United States. So everybody makes sure that their development strategy is FDA compatible. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have the FDA approve everything that you do, especially if you're doing, let's say, all of your development in Canada and you want to test it on Canadian people and all that. But you still have to adhere to FDA guidance, and it doesn't hurt. In fact, it's extremely helpful to get their input. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the FDA until now definitely has ruled.
Yeah. And I guess just a quick follow-up is just to say, I guess more the focus was more to question, as companies that are based in Canada, when you do your testing and your development in Canada, how have you navigated that?
Right.
Has that sort of been satisfactory?
Well, Canada is a sovereign nation. We still have to have sign off from Health Canada, right? So if you want to test your device in Canada, on patients, Health Canada has to issue you something called a no objection letter, right? That you can, in the US, it's called study may proceed letter. So you do have to submit an entire regulatory package for the regulators to review and to give you the approval to proceed. There's no legal way around that.
Yeah, it's part of your research protocol, so you can get a special permission. We did all of our R&D in Canada, pre-approval, pre-FDA, pre-Health Canada. This is somewhat pre-COVID, so it took 6 to 8 weeks with the research protocol. We also used an independent IRB that took 2 weeks. So for us, we were able to push the process through quickly. But we're class 2 medical device, doesn't touch anybody, not, it doesn't, there's no risk really to it. But remember, when you design these trials, and again, if your market is in the US and your goal is you got to have something reimbursed, they may not accept your Canadian trials. So if you're going to spend money, you got to think through that piece too.
And that's why you have to speak with the FDA ahead of time, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
you can
exactly.
get a lot of indication about the acceptability of data. Generally in the drug world, the FDA has been accepting of Canadian data, but it's really not the nationality of the data, it is the quality of the data. So there are certain standards in clinical trials. It's called ICH GCP, good clinical practice, and your data has to meet those standards in order for it to be acceptable to the FDA.
Yeah. And for me, on the side of reimbursement, so beyond that regulatory side, this year I'm the chair in Washington, actually, for in our sector for reimbursement. So what the code should be, should be paid, et cetera. And again, not sure how I manage that as a young Canadian company and a Canadian physician, but hearing directly from the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid on what is required to really pass these reimbursement codes. So it's been a fascinating journey to learn a lot about US reimbursement and the path to reimbursement. So I think the biggest challenge we face in the US market is really truly who's gonna pay for it, but who's gonna give you that code that pays for your product. So I would recommend, if there's a competitor in the space, you think you have something better, look up their codes and see first, could someone pay for this to start, or could the doctor be reimbursed for it? So they're called CPT codes. Again, if the US is your market. Otherwise, if it's not, just ignore me.
Karen mentioned another thing is if there's somebody else in your space, right? There's no reason for any of you who are planning any kind of startup to invent the wheel over and over and over again, right? There's a lot to be learned from companies that are like yours. So if you have new software that you want to commercialize, well, the details of your software and what it does is one thing, but there are other software companies out there, right? So you really do have to reach out and do your best not to reinvent the wheel.
I think networking is critically important, and as Michael's pointed out, as Karen have, entrepreneurs in general are pretty happy to share their learnings because they're looking to grow the pie rather than to take a smaller piece of it. So it is 6:04. I do be respectful of everyone's time. So first of all, I want to thank our panelists. Unfortunately, I guess Brian got caught up in the cath lab, but thank you, Michael. Thank you, Karen, for sharing all your knowledge. Thank you to the audience. I hope you guys were able to pick up some pearls of wisdom that sort of help you down this journey. Whatever you take it and use it, and whatever you don't, that's fine. And I think, I don't know how it will work out, Joanna, but I'll leave it to you. But hopefully Michael and Karen will be open to answering some questions. I think we can have a whole session on just the FDA and reimbursement in and of itself would probably take at least an hour or more, along with IP and other stuff. So finally, before I hand the mic off to Chal for a couple of minutes, or for a couple of comments rather, I do want to thank sort of a shout out to Joanna Giddens, who was behind the scenes and sort of instrumental in organizing this event. So thank you very much, Joanna, for this. I'm sure everyone's appreciated. And over to you, Jazz.
Thanks for moderating them all. That was great. Thanks to the speakers, Dr. Cross, Dr. Tymianski. We plan to have these webinars once every 2 months, so stay tuned for the next one. We'll announce a topic and the speakers over the next within the next month. We'll also announce the inaugural recipient of the Department of Surgery Innovation Award. Someone in their first 5 years of practice within the department. We'll announce that at Galley Day. And we also look forward to launching our website before Galley Day. So stay tuned and see you soon. Thanks, Amol.